right, well, hello and welcome to today's webinar, the Alpha Anywhere Demo and Q&A session. My name is Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our Lead Solutions Engineer here at Alpha. Today, Dion will be giving you, as he always does, an example and a demonstration of Alpha Anywhere, and afterwards he will be here to take your questions. But you could go ahead and start typing in those questions right now, and if you could type them into the GoToWebinar control panel, into the questions box, we will be reading through there, and we will get to them a little later on in the session. So thanks very much for joining us. I see we have actually a fairly large crowd, especially for the middle of the summer, so I'm very happy about that. Dion, let me just take you off mute here. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir. How are you doing today?
Fantastic.
Can you hear me okay?
I can. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter. Someone also had just written in at the very beginning saying that the audio didn't seem right. They weren't sure, maybe it was just me mixing weird with the music, but if you do have a weird, if the audio is not coming through for you, just let me know. Thank you.
And well, welcome everybody. Actually, I have a confession. I know exactly how Dave's doing today because I'm broadcasting from beautiful, sunny headquarters of Alpha Software. Right next door, actually, Dave is literally a wall away from me. It's magical.
Amazing. Instead of miles, right here.
It is, and luckily they have pretty fast internet here, so what's nice is if we want to, we don't actually have to see each other. We can just Skype each other over the wall, so it works out really well. Anyway, thank you everybody for taking time out. We got the last home stretch. I'm not sure who has children out there, but children already start going back to school. Mine hit the school on Monday. It is the last minutes of summer for a lot of people, and so we do really appreciate taking time out of your busy schedule and spending time with us. Maybe you're using this as an excuse to get away from your children early before they go back to school. That could be the potential. So if that's true, your secret is with us, and we'll actually edit out that little comment before we put this online so nobody busts you. Anyway, I am here in Alpha. We are here doing a ton of preparation work for the upcoming fabulous Alpha DevCon 2017. We're finalizing all the training items. We're also putting together the demonstrations and presentations. It's just the amount of content that's going to be at this year's DevCon is off the charts, more than I've ever seen, and I've been to DevCon for the last 5 years in a row, so I kind of see what's there, and what's going to be presented and what's available is just going to be off the marks. And also what's really cool is I've been talking to a lot of people who are already booked and ready to attend, and they're extremely excited, and they're excited for two reasons. One is they do know that we're going to be showing a lot of new stuff, a lot of capabilities, things that are really going to impact them, but also they're really looking forward to meeting other Alpha developers. A lot of these people are actually new to Alpha. They're large enterprises that have engaged with Alpha, and they want to get out there and start meeting and introducing themselves to other developers and consultants and other people like that. So really this year's DevCon I think is going to be fabulous. It's in Newport, Rhode Island, which is just a fabulous. In fact, I was just there about a week and a half ago. I was doing kind of a Northeast tour, and wow, I had never been there before, and it's off the charts amazing. It's sort of like someone took a postcard and said, okay, I'm going to turn this into a real place, and they just transformed it into a real place. Or actually it also, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Hey,
Dion, well, it also kind of reminds me a little bit of Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering if I've cut you off and I'll let you finish, but if you could go through the training, which we did actually finalize descriptions and stuff on the website just this morning, just to let people know what's
yeah, absolutely. Here, let me adjust this.
Last year, I believe, was just 1 day of training, and this time we're doing 2, and there will be multiple tracks. So just want to show that off.
Yep, it's coming up here. Absolutely fabulous.
And while
so we're going to have
to attend both the training and I keep talking over here, sorry, both the training and the conference. If you want to show up to just the training, we can do that. Some people may not have a full week to spare, but I do highly recommend that you do both. So go ahead, take it away.
Sure. No. So day one is all about building your applications, specifically mobile applications. And then day 2 is going to focus on how to deploy that application. So day 1 is broken into 2 tracks. One is mobile application development. So this is that core skill set of how to develop a mobile application. And actually, it's been very revised over the last few months as a lot of new capabilities have come down the road, new controls, new other things. So it really takes you that, okay, how do I create an app that I can do very complicated offline kind of behaviors using Alpha. The other track occurring on the same day is probably for people who are pretty familiar with how to develop mobile apps, but now they're looking at developing and debugging with PhoneGap and Cordova, meaning how do you then do a little bit more debugging and work with PhoneGap, things like plugins, using plugins, then debugging it when something goes wrong, and also things like using the PhoneGap shell, and also now introduced is the command line interface. So if you're not interested in using PhoneGap build a service, you can now install PhoneGap Cordova on your local machine and do that. And that's going to be hosted by Chris, who's an amazing, amazing developer, very experienced on that. So we're breaking it into two parts, kind of like, hey, get your feet wet, get in there, see all the neat cool capabilities of building mobile apps, see how fast you can do it, including mobile offline. And then the other part is for people who maybe have a little more experience and then are looking to extend their capabilities, specifically using PhoneGap and how to debug those kind of apps once they have it up running. Day two is about deploy. So once you've built your app, hey, I got to get it out there and get it into the wild. So we're going to talk about all the new capabilities that have come down the road. An introduction to Alpha Cloud. So Alpha now has a cloud-based solution that allows you to easily deploy your apps in a very high availability, high performance environment. Also, we're going to talk about Alpha Launch, which is another method for you to get your mobile apps out there without having to go through the PhoneGap process. It's really powerful for test, validation, and for just, hey, I want to get something out quick and I don't want to spend too much time. You can do that. And so we're going to be talking about these different methodologies that go to how you take your app off your development machine and get it out into the wild. And you're going to get an enormous amount out of these trainings. There's a whole set of team that will be there beyond the trainers to be able to help you, to answer your questions, to go into details on anything you may need. Plus, obviously, there's going to be a lot of peers that will be there also who have a lot of experience in this area that you'll be able to tap into. So we're still busy putting everything together and tying up all the loose ends, but we're on track and we can't wait to see everybody coming up. Let's see, it's about 2 months away. Is that about right? 23rd? Yeah, a little over 2 months away. So it's coming up quick. So go ahead and go on to alphasoftware.com/devcon 2017. You can view the event. You can register for it. And I'm also seeing there's still some really good pricing on flights and other things. There's a lot of aggressive sort of pricing going on in travel. So I think you'll find a very reasonable way to get up there and to attend with us. So we can't wait to have you there. Excellent. Dave, any other things or?
That'll do it. And I'm interested to see what you're talking about today.
Yes, indeed. So today, let me go down here. It's going to be a little bit of a geeky code day today. So let's see, I've got all my new ones all set up there. And so what I want to talk about, and actually this came out of a number of questions I've gotten recently where people are doing more and more, they need to be able to do, for instance, more sophisticated back-end processing of data from, say, even a mobile interface, doing like AJAX callbacks and other pieces there. And specifically around how do you use Xbasic to interact with a SQL database. So how do I create those? You know, sometimes a lot of what Alpha does, you can do with our built-in UX. We handle all of the CRUD code, everything, the updates, etc. With list controls, we do the same thing, but there's often a time where you go, hey, you know what? I need to create a little script that runs a function that updates a couple tables in my back-end database. And that's where Xbasic with SQL commands comes in. So what I'm going to do is do a quick walkthrough of a really basic way you can use Xbasic to talk to a database. I'm going to explain each part very clearly so you understand what is going on. But once you know this design pattern, the rest is really more of a SQL problem than an Alpha problem, meaning that you'll know how to call a SQL command to call a database, use a connection string, and do that from there. Now, I've gone ahead and created a little sample script that we'll be going through today, and if you don't mind, I sent that over to you, Dave. I hope you got that. It's in Skype. But if you don't mind posting it, this is something that will just, you know, for people who want to use this basic script, they'll be able to use it in the future. Now, the way I like to look at Xbasic and SQL is the old classic ad of you've got peanut butter with my chocolate, or you've got chocolate in my peanut butter, meaning they really go together very, very well. Each has enormous power. SQL is, you know, you can do things like store procedures and other capabilities in SQL, but I found that that becomes fairly arcane, and you really have to be kind of on top of it. And it's really not good for procedural type behaviors. SQL is more declarative in nature, meaning give me this result, apply this result, update, insert, etc. Whereas sometimes you need something a little bit more procedural, where you need to first look this up and then do a look at, and then compare it with this, and then do maybe an update or something along those lines. And that's where Xbasic shines. Xbasic is a very powerful language that has an enormous amount of built-in capabilities around interacting with SQL databases that allow you to create those more programmatic kind of things. I can do a query, take the results of that, use standard basic to compare it with this, and then again do another query to update a database table or something along those lines. So the combination of the two is greater, the sum is greater than the whole, meaning that each of those items together produces something very, very amazing from that standpoint. And not to say you can't use stored procedures in SQL. We obviously support that, and you can actually use that with Xbasic, but we find that, you know, that combination is really, really powerful. So what I want to do is just go through a very simple script, walk you through it, explain how each one is, and also talk a little bit of how you debug that script. You know, things don't always go right, so you need to be able to debug it and go from there. So with that in mind, you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting powerful data manipulation, meaning that you've got all that power of SQL, especially doing searches, sorts, groupings, things like that. I mean, SQL is so optimized that in certain situations you can do incredibly complex searches and filters that operate and happen under a second. So it's very good for those kind of pieces. If you were to try and create a loop in Xbasic to go through and do that same filter, it may take a lot longer just because it's sitting there and hitting the database over and over. So you can kind of pick and choose what tool does the best from there. We have a very powerful Xbasic programming language. It's basically a scripting language, but has a powerful class library, and we're adding new capabilities all the time. And we have a powerful set of built-in functions that make it easy for you to interact with that. Now, this is, I'm going to walk through the prototype script, and they're actually going to run it here, and I'm going to show you it in operation. We'll walk you through it, but basically there's a standard set of things that you do to interact with a database using Xbasic. First is you define it and connect to a database using a connection string. So much like you use connection strings to connect your grids, UXs, lists, etc., we're going to use the same exact concept. And what's great about that is that if you run your script locally and you have a connection string set up that way, works great. But then on your production side, since we're using that connection string, remember when you publish it, you can actually point to a different database with the connection string, and therefore your script doesn't have to change. It's going to pick up that connection string, and it's going to tell where to go and what to do at that point in time. You build your query, what you're going to basically pass to SQL to execute. You can also set arguments, which we're going to talk about, which are very powerful, that allow you to modify that query on the fly. You execute it, then you process the results, and then last thing you want to do is close that database once you've done it, so you don't have connections opening up there. So the key concepts are the connection string, the arguments, and the result sets. So why don't I do this? I'm going to come back and talk about each one in a little bit more detail, but I'm going to jump over into my development environment. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and go into the control panel. Now, most all the time we work with the web projects control panel, which is where we build components, web pages, etc. But Alpha has the control panel, which is the legacy control panel from the desktop days, that has a lot of powerful tools in there. And in fact, one of the most powerful tools is that it has basically a code tab that allows you to create scripts and run them. So it has sort of a built-in environment right there to create and run scripts. And when I'm developing scripts, I'll usually do it in this environment first, get it working, and then I'll move it to the UX, to a Ajax callback or something else, mainly because it's much easier to manipulate, stop, start, run, etc. in this kind of environment than it does when you're in a UX, because then you have to load the UX, hit the button, see the results. I kind of get it working here And then once I have that working, I can transport it into my UX, or I can actually take this and put it into a Xbasic module. So it's a function that's in a module, or now I can actually create a class out of that function / script so that I can start creating my own class libraries. And we're going to be talking a lot about class libraries over the next few months because there's some very exciting things that are coming down the road that we'll be talking about at the DevCon that really rely on Xbasic class libraries. And we did a presentation, I think about a month and a half ago, about that. We'll be doing more and more on that because they're just really powerful tools, and the rest of the system is going to take that power and use it from there. So I'm in the alpha development environment. I'm on the control panel. To get there, if you have both of them open, you just kind of click on the tab there. If you're in the web projects control panel, you can always click on control panel up here in the top, and it'll take you from here. So you'll notice there's the old school tables and sets and forms. This is DBF. Again, we're not using it, but you can still build DBF tables and other pieces. There are some really cool features there. But I go to the code tab. This is where I can create scripts, functions, etc. And again, I use this as my test environment. So I'm going to click New, and I'm going to create what's called a script using the Xbasic Editor. And that just opens up an editing window right there. And let's see, yep, I've got it right there. So I'm gonna go ahead and paste in this script. Now this script, by the way, again, we're gonna send it to you, so don't worry about having to copy it off the screen into there. But we're gonna walk through this script step by step. And this is basically the standard script that I always use when I start out. And you're welcome to go through and update that. By the way, there's a capability in Alpha where we can actually go in here, and in my alpha I can create a code library. So I've actually taken this script and put it in my code library called Database Standard. So whenever I need that anywhere, I just click Database Standard, and it basically pastes this. It's a snippet that it pastes into the screen from there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through each step of the way, and during that kind of talk a little bit about what each thing does. So first, up here, I'm dimensioning a set of different items that I'm going to need for my script. The first one is called a connection. Don't get confused with a connection string, and it's of type SQL connection. And this is the idea of a class. Actually, Alpha has built into a class called SQL and a connection. And in here is a ton of code that works behind the scenes that knows how to call a SQL database, pass it some information, get some information back, and it handles all the issues of multiple types of databases pieces there. We also have something called SQL arguments, which is the concept of I want to create a SQL query, but pass in an argument. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. And there's also this third thing called the result set, and you've probably heard that term before, but the result set is basically what you shove the information back from the result into, and then you can manipulate it using that information there. Now I have two other things that are in here. I've dimensioned a character string called connection string, or CN string. That's going to hold my connection string to my backend database. And then I've also created something called SQL Query, which is going to hold my query that I'm going to pass to my database from there. So again, I've got three things that are sort of built-in functional class libraries: SQL connection, SQL arguments, and SQL results set. Then we have a couple things from there. So these are always standard. If you're going to do a database script, those are always going to be at the top, because we're going to there's tons of code behind this that's going on, but we can encapsulate that in a very few lines from there. So our first thing we do is define a connection string. And in this case, I'm just setting my CN string to name connection string. Now, in this case, it's a name connection string. And I'll go back to my tools, AlphaDAO connection strings, and you'll see in my project I set up different connection strings, con, Excel, etc. Now, I'm going to go ahead and copy this just for giggles. But this is the way you want to do it, because when you publish to your server, you can on the fly change that connection string. But if you have a situation, you're not forced to use that name connection string. You can actually go in here and do the following is equal to, and paste that connection string, and then you've essentially hard-coded that connection string into your device. So I highly recommend you use a named connection string, not this one, just because then if you publish it to the server, it may be looking for a local database or a local, access database or something along those lines. And in fact, in this situation, I've got a series of different connection strings. Let me go back to my connection strings. And this one's pointing to an access database, but what I'd like to do is I'm going to connect it to MySQL. So I want to actually go against a local MySQL database that I have here. So I'm going to go back in here and just change this from connection to, there you go, connection MySQL. So now when it runs, anything after that is going to go against that particular connection string. Now, one of the key concepts of connection string is that it does two things, and this is an important concept. First is that it tells where the data source is, its specific location. Like for an access database, it gives it a file directory saying, okay, this is an MDB file at this location. For one of the SQL servers, like it's giving a server address with the login and all the other things that are going there. And when you set up the connection string, it says, oh, you're on a SQL server, I need this information to be able to talk to that server. But it also tells the system what kind of database it's going to. So by knowing what kind of database to it, it can translate standard SQL into all the different elements. It can do different functions because it knows how to essentially talk to that database. So think of it as like if I were out and there was a French, English, and Japanese, I could know where those people are, but also I know how to talk to them, what kind of language they understand. And Alpha takes care of all of that for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And again, you can predefine those with the named AlphaDAO connection strings, which highly recommended because when you go to publish to a different environment, you can switch those out on the fly. And also there are ways, by the way, to define this on the fly. So you can actually dynamically create a connection string. It's kind of more an advanced topic, but it's kind of a neat feature because on the fly you could essentially dynamically figure out what database you're going to do something. But I tend to use named AlphaDAO strings because I think they're the most powerful and easier to use. So I go ahead and create my connection string. I tell it that this is where I'm going to go to get that data. Now I do a very powerful, the first step is doing this powerful, where the situation is it's going to run this little command that's going to take my connection string and it's going to try and open a connection to that database. So basically this is the first step to say, okay, when this script runs, it's going to go ahead and try and talk to that database there. And you'll notice that I'm using conn.open. Remember, we define conn as a SQL connection. So a conn is basically a class and it has a specific function associated with it called open. And I'm passing it in the name connection string. Then it's going to take that and do all of its magic under the covers to call that database and call back. Now, the way I've structured this is it says, you know what, if not. So this returns a true or a false. And in fact, if you click on it, you'll see it gives you a little description of what it does and what are the passwords. So if we look right here, you have a connection. It returns a logical. So that returns either a true or a false. So if it is successful, it returns a true, saying, hey, yeah, I got a connection. If it doesn't, then it returns a false, and therefore you can tell whether that connection was open or not. Because you don't want to connect and not connect, or you don't want to have a situation where you don't connect and you still run all your other code to talk to that database. You're kind of game over at that moment there. So what I'm doing is I'm doing an if not, saying if not true, or generally if false, then I'm going to throw an error. And what's kind of nice is that in that connection string, after it makes that call, it puts the result of that call in this thing called conn.callResult.text. So this is the human readable answer that says what the problem was, so that you can then either display it to the user, use it for your debugging or other pieces there. So once the system tries to connect, either connects and you keep moving forward, or it says, oh, I failed, and then you can grab the result of that failure out and use it from there. So that's all there is to it. So this is your first step. You define the connection string, you try to connect. If it connects, you're good to go. You keep processing. If not, you're going to throw an error. You could either show it to the person or do whatever you want to do and find out what the error caused. Maybe there was a misspelling in the database name, or the connection wasn't live and available at that time. But that way you don't have a problem where it keeps running code and it goes off the rails there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define the query. So basically how the Xbasic commands work is you build a query and then you pass that to SQL, the SQL database, and then it returns the data for you. So this is just an old piece of code in there. So I'm just going to go in here and say, I'm going to say select star from customers. And if I go into my database here, I'm going to go into my demonstration. I've got a table called customers. So all I want to do is just return all this data from the database here. Now obviously I could put in a where clause, and we'll show you that in a few moments to show you how that works. So I'm just going to keep it very simple, and I just want to return all roles from the customers table in this. Now in this case on arguments, I'm going to go ahead and just for now, I'm not going to pass any arguments because I'm going to come back to that in a few moments and describe in more detail what arguments are and why you really want to use them. Okay, so now I've got my connection, my database is open, I've created my query, now I'm ready to execute that query. And again, I'm using that CONN object that we had before. And what we're passing to it is the query we want to run and the arguments that should be used for that queries. In this case, still just pass nothing because it doesn't need anything. So it's very simple. Once you define your query, you're good to go. And again, what I'm doing here is that when you do this, or when you do that execute, it's going to return a true or false. True means that it executed successfully with no errors. False is that something happened wrong with it. And I'll actually show you what that looks like in a moment here. Okay. Now, if it's true, then I'm going to go ahead and process my data. In this case, I'm going to grab a result set and go through it. If it is false, then I have an error. I'm going to do the same thing I did up here. I'm going to generate an error, and I'm going to pass it this information so I can see exactly what the problem was that caused there. Maybe I had a malformed query or something along those lines. So with that, let's go ahead and just walk through this real quick and show you kind of how it's working so far, and then we'll go into what we do. We're going to go back in, talk about arguments in a minute, but we're also going to talk about how do we actually process the data. So the customer ID, let's see, what is it called here? I'm just going to, just so we have something in here, and I'll explain this, is equal to res.data customer ID. Okay, so let's walk through this and watch how it works. So I'm going to save this as webinar Xbasic SQL. So now I've got it in here. When you're in here, there's a little button up here that lets you run it, but I'm going to go ahead and go here and put a debug statement because I want to walk through it with you and show you how each step goes. So this is kind of the nice thing, is now I can change, debug it, run it, and then once it's all good, I put it into a class library or put it into a Xbasic module or copy into wherever I need it to. So I'm going to click here. It's going to go ahead and start running and immediately launch the Xbasic debugger. So we're in the debugger. I'm going to step through this. And so first you'll notice that it took this value and put it into there. Now what I'm doing here is this is the command that's going to try and open the database. So I'm going to go ahead and click step, and you'll notice that it jumped from here down to here. So it worked, meaning that everything is good. And in fact, if I look at the connection.callResult.text, it said success. I was able to connect to that database. I've got it. No problem. Go ahead and run the rest of your code. If there were an error, which I'll show you in a moment, it's going to stop and would throw this error generate, and then it would show you from there. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load up my query. So I've gone ahead and loaded up my query. This is just a text or a character variable. And now I'm at the very powerful number 22 connection.execute. In this case, it's going to execute this query. So we'll click step up. In this case, you'll notice that since it was successful, it returned a true, it went ahead and processed it. If there were a problem with my query, it would have jumped down here and allowed me to then handle that error. So it allows you to have things nice and neat there. So now that I'm in here, I'm going to now grab and put in the connection.result set into a variable called a result set. And think of it as sort of temporary storage. The query is going to bring back a series of rows, 1, 0, or 1 or many. And what we're going to do is take those results and put them into result set. Because now that they're in a result set, you'll notice that we can now do things like walk through each row. And in fact, that you'll see that result set includes all the information about how many columns are in there, what was the query, what is the actual number of counts, etc. from that standpoint here. So the next thing I'm going to do is a command called rs next row. And basically, if a result set is like, think of it as like a little local table, what I want to do is walk through that table. So I'm just going to loop through that with a while command saying, give me the next row. And the moment there's not a next row, you reach the end of the result set, it's going to stop that while loop. So I'm going to click step. So now what it's done is it's put basically a pointer at that row. And that's the concept of this rs.nextRow, is that essentially it's putting like a pointer. So you have like a local table and it's going to basically walk through it. Now, when that pointer is on that row, I can now use the language rs.data and then put the column name in there, and that will give me the value of that column in that row. So let's go ahead and do that and see if that works. And we'll notice now, customer ID is Anatar. So if I look in my database here, it's on Anatar. And actually I skipped Alfie, but I'll explain in a few moments on that. So the idea behind it is that it goes through each row, and so if I step and I've gone to the next row, watch what happens to customer ID. You'll notice as I go through that while loop, it's basically going from row to row, and then when you're on that row, you can use this rs.data to actually grab that information out. And so we'll go through all the rows, as many as you have, and at that point, once it's done, it'll end the while and then we'll exit our script. So that's really the heart of it. You create a connection string, you connect open, you pass it a query, and then if it's successful, you operate from there. Now let's show a couple other quick things. One is, I want to go ahead and go back into here, and I want to change this. I'm first going to go ahead and just make a problem. So let's watch what happens when a problem occurs. So my connection string is bad. Watch what happens. When I went to connect to my open, it actually didn't jump over, it went in there. And you'll notice that the connection call resort said, I can't find the name connection, CONNMYSQ. So it gives you the knowledge of what the problem is so you can handle it. So let's go ahead and go back, put that in there. And we'll go ahead and run this. But what I'd like to do is I'm going to change it and make my SQL query bad. So I'm going to save that and run that. Again, my connection string should work now. I define my query, but we know it's a bad query. Now I'm going to execute that. Watch what happens. You'll notice that it didn't execute the code that had to go ahead and call back. It jumped into here. And in fact, we can sit there and say the result text is right here, down here. Let me go ahead and expand this so you can see it. It says your database has returned the following error code. Table demonstration.customer doesn't exist, because it should be called customers. So as you can see, the actual error checking is very robust. And that's one of the things I love about Xbasic, is that it really gives you all this data about what's going on, so it's not a mystery, and then you can trap those errors and then handle them as you need to handle them from there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that from here. Now, let's do this. Let's take it up a notch. Let's say I need to have a variable situation where I'm passing in, I say, give me all the customers where city is equal to Berlin. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And if I go into my thing here, and let's do a filter, and let's go add a filter here, city is equal to Berlin. And I'll actually do a equal to. So it returns 1. How about London? There you go. So it returns about 6 rows. But what I want to do is pass into that query a value. So I want to say, in this case, London. Now, you'll notice that this is hard-coded. So if I run this and I step through it, the query works. Oh, didn't like it. Where? Sorry, that. It takes care of spelling. Okay. So now you'll notice that it is just going through and showing me, you'll notice that my result set only has about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items in there. So as I go through it, after about the 6th time I go through it, it should stop executing at that time, and we're done. So therefore, what's nice about that is that your result set is just going to be essentially the same thing as what came back from SQL. It is what came back from SQL. But the problem I have is this is hard-coded. I may want to have that as a variable. So let's change that. And the way you change that is through something called an argument. An argument is an item that you can pass into a query. Now, I could do it this way. I could create this plus city name plus, okay, so I could do this and I could go dim city name as C, city name is equal to London. Now this is perfectly okay. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to dynamically build up this query, and that's one of the powerful parts, and that's what's so cool about, say, versus doing a stored procedure, is that since you can just use string manipulation to build your query, you can create very complicated queries. You could take like 5 different factors and then on the fly generate a very unique query that used to it, so which I use on a number of projects, especially when I'm doing complex filtering. I do that there. So this will work fine. And you're welcome to use this technology and use it this way. The problem is that it's somewhat risky. And if you've ever heard of what's called a SQL injection attack, it was a common problem out there where people would go onto a website, and behind the website they were like inserting data or returning data like this. So they would go into a field, and in there they would type a SQL statement, and when that SQL statement came in, it actually built a SQL statement including another SQL statement, and sometimes it would just spit out the error with the information, and all of a sudden your customer's social security numbers are available to see. And that's called a SQL injection attack, and it's a very common practice, and it's something you need to guard against. So in this situation, you're not really protected, meaning that you would have to write the code to look at it and say, is that really a city or is it SQL and I need to get rid of it? Well, Alpha handles that for you, and we do it through what's called so I'm going to go ahead and copy this so you can keep that in there, and I'll put that in there. I'll get this. So instead of doing it that way, I can do it the following way, which is kind of cool. Okay. So in my SQL query, I add what's called an argument, and it starts with a colon and then says city after it. Then down here, I set that argument here using this command called args.set, which is part of this SQL arguments, and in there I put in London. Okay, so I'm kind of doing the same thing. The nice thing is Alpha is going to go ahead and insert that. You'll notice also I got rid of these single quotes because Alpha knows that that is a string, and so it's going to handle all that stuff for you. So it actually makes your queries look much cleaner as you get along from there. So now what's going to happen is when this runs, instead of kind of concatenating some stuff, it's going to actually take this, and in the execute, it's going to merge them together for you automatically. So let's give that a try. So I'll go in here. I connect, I go ahead, I'm going to go here. Now notice in here I'm setting my argument there, and then I'm going to click step here, and you'll notice that it returned true, so it worked fine. And if I walk through it, I would get the same results, because what Alpha did basically was take this little colon city and then put in London with single quotes around it. So you could put in a date, a time, whatever it is. Now the cool thing about that is that it makes this very readable, because I can say, oh yeah, I'm passing in city. You don't have this, and as your queries get more complex, you could have like pretty wild concatenation statements. So this handles it very nice. Now, the other thing it does is that it obviously looks at the content of here and won't let you put in like a SQL injection attack and other things like that. So it's really the safe way to go, and I highly recommend when you're using Xbasic and queries to use arguments, and off to the races here. So that is basically a quick introduction to using that. Again, it's very powerful, meaning that you get the best of both worlds. You use all the power of SQL, but you do that. By the way, in here, this SQL query could be like, update, let's see, update customers set, let's say postage equal to 1123, where city is equal to city. So you're not limited to select queries. You can do updates, inserts, anything. You could even pass in stored procedures. So for instance, you could pass a stored procedure with a set of parameters that are dynamically generated, so you're not limited to that. So you get the best of both worlds. You get SQL, the power of SQL in terms of querying fast, optimization, transactions, all that kind of stuff, but you also get the powerful Xbasic library that allows you to do these kind of on-the-fly things, which would be very difficult in a stored procedure and also harder to maintain, because stored procedures can get pretty arcane pretty quickly just because they weren't really designed to do procedural. They're declarative in nature. So to do any kind of procedural stuff in a stored procedure, it's either a hack or you're forced to kind of use a lot of native SQL statements for that particular platform, which locks you into that platform, which makes your maintenance over time more expensive. You really want to try and maintain sort of a agnostic on your database structure from there. So we've included and we're sending to you this basic script. Feel free to use it. Again, I kind of go into my control panel into code and run my scripts there. Once they're perfect, copy it out, put it into my Xbasic module or now my class library, or paste it right into a UX and say an Ajax callback or something, function there, and all of this will work fine. Make sure you use connection strings, just because when you go to publish you don't have hard-coded connection strings in your system. And with that, I'm going to turn back to Dave and see if we have any questions on that. If not, we have some time for other questions.
Great. So a couple of questions here. One had to do just in general about Xbasic, and the question was whether or not we had an Xbasic tutorial that was available. And actually we do. There's one actually right in the documentation system. So I don't know if you want to show that off.
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. Help, yeah. Remember, help, open documentation, opens up documentation.alpha software.
And just still type in Xbasic tutorial should be all you need to type in, I think, for that.
There we go.
That is beginner's tutorial. I think we want the Xbasic one. So just
sorry.
Back up.
Do I go back
Basic
one more?
Reference. Yep. I'm sure Sarah is on, our documentation person. She can point us to the right place.
She probably wants to beat on me
I know.
right now, going, you have made me upset, Dion.
Please interrupt, yes.
A
But as you can see,
tutorial.
there's a massive
tutorial in
Xbasic.
Xbasic. There we go. That's the one.
But, yeah.
Follow that. It has all kinds of great stuff in it.
It's not, and remember everybody, it's not the tutorial. It is a tutorial, because there's probably a bunch of other tutorials hiding behind the backgrounds or something like that. But no, it goes through everything, including classes. Oh, this one's awesome, because it also talks, beyond the tutorial, there's also a huge amount of, Xbasic is a rich and developed language. It allows you to do, classes, polymorphism, and all these really complex concepts. So, hugely powerful, and also really built for you to compartmentalize and reuse code as much as possible. So, fun stuff. And it's a bit more on the geeky. We try to be a no-code company, and we do, but sometimes a little bit of code, 10, 15 lines of Xbasic, can do a lot. It's amazing how much it can do. So, excellent.
Next question. With this SQL statement, is there an issue connecting to a database in that the user is going to be given the name to the connection to the database? And what are the security implications behind having an Xbasic script in which you have a SQL statement in it? Supposedly not very much, it looks like, if you're using a connection string, because they don't know anything about it. It's all obscured. But if you paste in,
and also in your connection strings, just to let you know, in connection strings, you'll notice that it encrypts the password information. So if someone were to get that connection string, for some reason, they're going to get maybe the location of the database, the username, but they won't have the password, because you can encrypt that. So that gives you a protection there. And yeah, I mean, if they get access to this code, they're going to know a little bit more about the structure of your database kind of scenarios. But, one thing you can do, by the way, and this is a very cool feature, is now what I could do is say, okay, great, I got this working. So now I'm going to go ahead and create an Xbasic class library. So I'm going to go into my Xbasic class library. I'm going to define a class, and in here I'm going to define that function. But I'm going to do the following, is I can put in a directive in here. Let me create a new class, see if they have that on there. Check this out. You can now encrypt your class libraries. So what it allows you to do is in your class library where you're going to do your functions and have your SQL statements and everything else, you can actually encrypt that library, so if someone gets access to it, they're not going to see anything in there. You're going to be the one to see that. And this also allows you to create class libraries you can hand to other developers, to other people, and they can't muck with your code. So this encryption capability is very powerful because it gives you control and actually prevents those prying eyes kind of scenario. They won't know how your code works. They'll have documentation. They can see the information, but it also prevents them from actually editing it and changing it. So let's say you have 3 or 4 developers on your team. You could have one developer who is that master person. They could actually create this class library encrypted, and then if there's bugs, they fix it, give it to other people, and that way you don't have to worry about other people mucking with the code. Depends on how your organization runs.
Excellent. I'm going to see if there are any more SQL questions, and if not, we'll go to some other ones. Oh, this is a good one, actually. Someone brought this up, but I had noted it as well. So the error generate statement.
Yes.
What's it do? And how do you use it?
I apologize.
And, yeah, that seems like a neat thing, but I had
okay. Yeah. So let me go ahead and just show you. And again, highly recommend you use the built-in Xbasic code library, which you add. So I've got a little bit of a error handler there, and I'm going to call this test. Okay. So let me go ahead and copy this. Anybody from the basic days, it is a go-to. They do still exist and are handy from that standpoint. Go here. Okay. And then I'm going to change this from eJob. I'm going to say show message message. Okay. So this is how error trapping works. And again, good practice is always put this in your functions, so you know if something goes wrong, it fails gracefully. Alpha does a lot of really nice things to kind of report back when things go wrong on the server. It'll record that data, but you obviously want to have things die gracefully, that if there is an error, you trap and handle it versus the user getting this some weird message on the screen saying whatever. So in this situation, what happens is you define what's called an on-error go-to, and then you give it a name. And this name can be anything you want, Beelzebub or whatever it happens to be. And what will happen is when Xbasic runs this script, it will run the script, but then if it runs into an error, it says, oh, you know what? I want it to go to this location. So down here, you'll notice I have that name with a colon after it. So this is a spot that if any error occurs, it's going to jump right to here. And then I can run the following code. First is I can get the error, and then error codes, that's an error code. And then the error code will be translated in English here, and then I can show the user that message. Or I can actually look at that code myself and do an if statement to do a whole bunch of other different things. Maybe roll back a transaction, do other things that are important from that standpoint there. Now, very important, you'll notice that I have an in statement, because what happens is that if it runs through this code right here and no errors occur, it's going to still run. So if I don't have that in statement, it's going to go ahead and do these things. But if I put in statement, then in my function or wherever it is, it just stops executing at this location right here. So again, to trap errors, you put an on error go to, and you give it a specific name. And then down here, you put that name in there with the colon, put this little code. You'll notice I had eJavaScript because like in this would throw it would send in when you're using it on like a dialogue, it would throw that back, so the user would see a JavaScript alert with the message that I want to present to them. Now, one other thing that's really important, and this has got me sometimes, is that what you want to do is, especially if you have like a module or Xbasic class, these on errors, these need to be unique. So if you have 2 different functions and you use the same error, it's not gonna work because it confuses the script processor. So just make sure for each like either function or module or set of script that you make this unique on there. So let's go ahead and show that in operation. Let's go ahead and see here, and I'm going to go ahead and do my connection string problem. Now that I've got my error handling, I'm going to go ahead and put in a debug so we can walk through it and watch what it does. We'll actually watch what happens when I don't have a debug, and then we'll do that. So I'm going to run that, and you'll see, oh, it might actually be good to say not show message, but there's show var, by the way, or I want to use message box and just throw up a message box. So I'm going to go like that, and you'll notice that I have a nice new message box, and this is the error. It says I can't find that connection string from that standpoint there. So if I actually go in here and I put in a debug, okay, we'll go here. Okay, so I'm going to step here. I'm now going to attempt to open that. Oh, I have a problem. So I'm going to throw in what error underscore generate is me controlling that process. So if there's any kind of error, I don't have to have error generate. So like if I misspelled something or screwed something up, it's still going to trap that error and jump there. But this is a command where I can throw that error. I can say, oh, you know what? I'm going to add in a little extra front end text so they kind of understand the context of the error. So this is where you can throw an error in your code. It's equivalent to the try fail on JavaScript and things like that. So now watch, I click step, and you'll notice that it jumped all the way down here to where our handler was. Now I'm going to click step. Okay, so it gave me the error. The error is 16051, which is very powerful but worthless to most people. You're like, what is that? Look up the manual. So there's a built-in function called error text get, where if I click step, what it does is it translates this. Oh, I sometimes get this error there. So what happens is in the debugger, sometimes what it does is that it times out after a little bit. So let me go ahead and do this a little faster, and we'll run that. Okay, notice that the message here is there. So now I can get the human readable version of that message. And now with that message, I could write it to a log file to the user. I could trigger a whole other thing to do something. I could call another function. So in this case, I just want to click step, and it will throw up a nice message box with that information in it. So that's a real quick introduction to that. Again, good programming practice, which I obviously didn't follow for my demonstration today. So do as I say, don't do as I do. Make sure you have on errors, because it really, I'm the first to admit it. This will allow you to trap those errors and handle them gracefully. You can also use this error generate very handily. I've used this almost debugging tools where, let's say I want to pronounce something, I'll just throw a fake error generate and put the value of a variable in there, and then it'll throw it to the disk or do whatever it is. So I could, because I don't want it to continue running the other code, I basically want it to stop at that moment, throw up a message, and go from there. So that's that scenario, and that's how on error go to. And once you get used to it, it's really easy. Again, I have it built in, and you'll kind of notice it's kind of cool. When I go error handler, it actually asks me where I can then, code libraries allow you to insert text in there. So it's kind of cool. So you can put that in there. But play with that. Make sure you put all this stuff in your code library, because then you'll save you hours and hours of typing or going and copying it from flat files and things like that.
Excellent. Here is a question that was asked early, so let's go get to it right now. And it said, on the UX template, the one that's called Mobile App Framework with Split View Expanding Tree Menu, that's a long name. How do you edit the expanding menu?
We'll have to come back to that. I haven't actually worked with that one yet, so I would just be poking around in the dark, but we can queue that up for next week and look at that. So Dave,
actually, if you don't mind taking 1 minute, I think Sarah may have the answer to that one.
Good. Hey, take it away. It takes a villain.
Do that. Sarah, you still there? It takes a villain.
Here.
They said it takes a villain. All right, excellent.
Villicon.
Takes a villain to solve a.
I'll do it. Sure. I can share my screen if that is.
Make presenter. Yeah, great.
I'm going to take my nap now.
And share your screen. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's right.
I want to explain this. So when you create a new component, you can start with a blank UX component, which is this radio button up here, or you can create one from one of these templates, which are listed in this box. And we currently have 2 with expanding tree menus. There's this one that's a very long mouthful to say. And then this other one down here, the mobile app framework with split view expanding tree menu. And the expanding tree menu in both of these samples uses the view box. So when you come into the one that we just created here, there's this menu panel inside, there's a view box. And if you edit it, either by double-clicking it or clicking the dot box over to open view box properties, right here on the data source tab is where all of those menu definitions are. And they are defined using JSON. So if you wanted to add your own options with this template without changing anything, without adding an expanding menu control, you would have to come in here and edit this JSON for the view box to customize it yourself. Now, if that makes you uncomfortable and you do not like doing that, oops, cancel, exit without saving. What you can do is you can just delete this view box and go over here into data controls and go down to more and select this expanding menu control from here, create a new expanding menu in that menu panel, and make sure it is placed inside the menu panel card, not outside of it. And then select it and make sure to fill container so it fills the full container, and then provide a definition for the menu itself. So so you could have like option 1, option 2, option 3, and option 4. And what this will let you do is work with the tree genie to add your on-click event, which in here you can add JavaScript actions to run action JavaScript. You can write your own custom JavaScript. You can add that here, and now that gives you something that's a lot easier to work with in terms of the interface if you're not very savvy with JavaScript and JSON and CSS. And that's that expanding menu control right here.
I love that
That's
control.
how you could edit it. So
Cool.
yeah,
Thanks very much.
you have 2 options.
Cool.
And this will be recorded, so if she went so fast,
yeah,
you'll still be able to watch this and rewind it.
you will indeed. Take a look at videos.alphasoftware.com or just send us an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com. Now is a good time to actually bring up the fact that if you do have questions in between these sessions, by all means send them to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com, and we will be happy to take a look at them. One last question, and I think it's pretty quick, and I'm going to hand it back to Dion on this one. And that is, you had talked about logging error text. Can you just sort of give us an example of logging error text rather than just displaying it on the screen?
Great question. Great question. Real straightforward, and this is the way I use this.
Let me go ahead and make it a presenter again. So
Okay.
it's on the screen.
Cool.
And I don't see your screen yet. So is there a button you need to check? Push?
Hasn't asked me. Let's see. Oh, there it is on there.
Hidden.
Okay. Cool.
Great. Okay.
Very simple. You just go save to file, message, comma, c/debug/error issues.txt, comma, true. Okay. So Alpha has a really nice built-in function called save to file, and in there you pass first what text you want to put in that file, then you give it the full realized path of where you want that to go, essentially the file name. By the way, this is the only tricky part of this is that, if you're on a server, it may be a little different, so you have to think out where you want to save that, but usually it's not a big deal. And then the last thing, which is really kind of cool, is called append, which means that if I put false, it's going to overwrite that file. If I put true, it's going to append to that file. So what's nice is I can be putting in over and over. And in fact, the way you do that is really just go plus carriage return line feed. So what it'll do is it'll spit out the message, it'll append a line feed, and so therefore each message will be on a different row. And then I do things like along the lines of this. So I'll also do like now plus : plus, okay, So basically what this will do is it will spit out the current time, a colon, and then the message after it. So if you want to see time-based information. And all this is I'm just concatenating exactly what I want to spit out into the file, puts it in this file with either a .true means it keeps adding it to that file. So over time that file will grow bigger, but no big deal. It depends on how many errors you're generating, hopefully not a lot. And then you can always clear out that file by just saying .f, and then what will happen is it will write it over there. So that's how I usually do error logging on the server, and it can be handy because you don't always see, you don't have always you maybe want to silently trap those errors, or you may not have an interface that you can throw up for the user. So anyway, it's just save to file. By the way, just go into our handy dandy to file, and right here in our Xbasic or in our alpha, we've got the save to file function. By the way, there's a get from file, and it explains how it works with an example and some other information along those lines.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan. And it looks like we
Thank
have
you.
come to the end of our time. So thank you, everyone who showed up today. Thank you for asking questions, and do send in your questions to guides, GUIDES, @alphasoftware.com, and we'll be happy to take a look at them. You can find a copy of today's recording at videos.alphasoftware.com. It usually takes a few days to be posted. So thank you again, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care and goodbye.